For the record, would you please tell me who you are and how old you are today?
I am Joyce Millicent Conrad, and I'm 80 years old.
And today's date is January 1, 2010.
Correct.
And my name is Paul Davis, your son-in-law. You can't see me on the camera, but I'm conducting this interview. I'm with my wife, Evelyn Conrad, Joyce's only daughter. This is a video documentary account. In the next hour or so, we're going to try to learn things about this woman that we can preserve through history. Joyce, talk about your childhood first. Let's talk about the childhood years, and you can just start rambling. Where were you born? What year? And I'll ask you some questions after that.
Okay, I was born in the upstairs front bedroom of my parents' home, and Dr. Johnson of Newark, Delaware, came to attend my mother, and my nurse was supposed to be a friend in the village, but her granddaughter was born in the frame row right across from the house on the very same day, so mother lost her nurse. So my aunt Florence Lockard of Philadelphia, my mother's sister, came down and spent the 2 weeks with my mother, because in those days the mother had to stay in bed for two weeks after the baby was born. But I don't remember all that.
And what city and state are we talking about?
We're talking about Elk Mills, Maryland, Cecil County.
North of Baltimore, Maryland.
Yes.
And you grew up, talk about the home you grew up in.
The building itself
It was a nice structure, wasn't it?
It was a 3-story home with a basement, with a coal heater. The hot water heater used coke, and coke was a byproduct of coal, which my father and I, and sometimes my brother, went down to the mill, Baldwin Manufacturing Company in Elk Mills, and they had a dump there where the mill put out the byproducts of the coal, and we would take a bag with us and pick up the coke, and that would be used to heat the hot water heater. The first floor had the kitchen, living room, and dining room. The upstairs had 4 bedrooms and a bath. The attic had a floor, and during World War II, my dad put a partition in that room and made it into 2 bedrooms. The purpose was to rent it out to some of the mill workers who came to work at the mill because the mill was going into manufacturing for the military to make canvas for the Navy. And so this attracted people from Philadelphia, and they came. But however, we really never had anyone stay up there. We had one man come, and he lived with us 3 weeks. He might have used a bedroom upstairs, but he got homesick for his family. He couldn't stand being away from his family, so he left.
Now, as a young girl, did you always bathe in a bathtub? Did you ever take a shower as a young person?
We did not have a shower. We had a bathtub. So that's why I grew up not being used to showers.
When did you have your first shower? Can you remember?
That's a good question. Probably here in Houston. I don't remember. I did shower. No, I'm wrong. I did shower when I was at Elkton High School, and we'd come back from gym. We could go. I think we did. We had a shower. We'd change there and shower.
What kind of things did you do as a little girl?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
That attic, was that where your mom and dad slept?
No, they.
I mean the bedroom, the attic went up from the bedroom.
No, yes.
So were they sleeping in that bedroom when they were going to have boarders? Or were they using a different room?
No, they were using their same bedroom, but people had access to it.
As a young girl, what do you remember?
But we didn't have anybody stay there any length of time.
What are your first few memories of being a little girl?
Right, I remember my earliest memory is of riding a little tiny tricycle, and it was passed down probably from my brother because it wasn't new. But I remember riding to the little grocery store on that thing and riding up and down the lane. I don't know how come I got to the grocery store. Maybe I got bigger and rode there. But I remember that. My very earliest memory was standing in my crib in what we called the sunroom, the room facing the lane of the frame row, which had all windows. And I remember standing in my crib and wanting my mom to come get me out.
You remember
And
that?
I have vague memory of my Aunt Audrey with car. She was probably 12, 14. I think she slept in that room they had a bed and a crib when she stayed there, because sometimes she stayed there because Granddaddy came to live with us at times. Granddad Carr, because he was widowed.
Talk about the school. You would walk to school?
Yes.
Wasn't very far though.
It was about 1 mile, uphill and down. Sometimes we rode our bikes to school. My cousin Audrey would ride on the back. She didn't have a bike. And other times we'd take sleds to school with us. If it rained, we just got our umbrellas and boots and walked to school, because my mother did not drive, so we didn't count on anybody taking us to school. We just went to school. That's all there was to it. Come rain, come hail, come shine.
What was the schoolroom set up like? It wasn't a one-room schoolhouse.
It was a 2-bedroom school.
2-bedroom.
A 2-room school. No, not bedroom. No, it was, they have one school room for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, and the next room was 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. It was a larger room. And if I recall, there was a 3rd room in that building, but it was unused. So I remember when we got our shots to go to school, they set it up in that room. But I don't remember much more about that room. But I do know that Mrs. Dibert, who's my dad's first cousin, she taught the 4 grades, and Miss Kavanaugh taught the 3 grades. And that's pretty interesting, being in a room and where 4 grades are being taught. I like that when I think back up, because she'd have 1 grade doing a subject, another she'd be working with personally, and the rest of us would have an assignment. And then she moved from one class to the other, going over their work, and she'd have different ones get up to the board and do math and so forth.
How could you not be distracted though?
It didn't seem to be distracting. And then sometimes she would have, she could play the piano. She'd have music class for all of us, and we'd sing and so forth. She really worked it out beautifully.
Do you remember growing up in a loving home, or are you one of those that has baggage from your childhood, emotional things that went wrong that affect you today?
I really and truly believe I was happy in my childhood. I was made to feel very comfortable in my home. I had free time to myself to play with my paper dolls. I used to, every Sunday I'd go over to my grandmother's, who was in the row across the way, and get the Sunday paper, and I remember Dixie Dugan or one of those had cutouts in there. I'd cut out the doll and the clothes, and then they'd have others next Sunday. So I had quite a collection. I often wondered what happened to my paper doll collection, because I had a real elaborate one.
Hobbies as a young woman, young girl, besides the dolls? Of course, you didn't have television.
I know I listed my radio programs. I had a radio in my room, and I wrote down in this little book all the programs that I wanted to listen to and to schedule, so I knew when to listen to them and so forth. You talk about hobbies. I think I like being out. I was outside most of the time if I could be. I like to climb trees. I like to walk in the woods, and we'd go down and play cowboys and Indians in the woods and build huts out of crates from the mill. And we liked to swim. We'd swim in the summer most of the day. And of course we had
In a river.
a creek, the Big Elk Creek. We'd go up to Brewster's. We'd walk through the woods to Brewster's. That must have been a mile and a half or something like that, but
How deep was the water?
it was over my head. It was deep in the center, not so deep on the sides. But and everybody went there. So sometimes after work, when the people came from the mill, someone would go to Brewster's and they'd pile us all in the car and we'd get a ride. But during the day we were on our own. We would go through the woods. And sometimes we swam in the we called the Little Elk Creek. It was another part of the creek down back of the woods, closer to home. We'd go.
Now, how old were you?
But that wasn't as deep.
How old were you when you were first allowed to go by yourself?
I might have been 9 or 9.
And nobody watched you in the water? Did anybody ever drown?
No, we all went. Usually there are older ones with us, my brother and different ones. There was always a crowd there of kids. And apparently the parents weren't worried about it. They'd just be home in time for dinner. So we got home in time for dinner.
Let's clarify for those watching this tape, or whatever form it's in 100 years. You grew up when you were 8, 7, 6 years old. What years were these now? 1930s, 40s?
Yeah. I was born in 1929, so this would be in the 30s. The war started in 1941, World War II, and I was about 12 then.
And you remember that?
Definitely, everybody remember. Yeah, we remembered that. I remembered especially because my cousin, Edward Hubbard, Daddy's sister's son, who lived in Elk Mills next to the grocery store, near the grocery store, had a son at Hickam Field in Honolulu, and he was there when it attacked. They were attacked, and he got a medal for bravery because he went through. They were strafing the planes were strafing the different areas. They sunk the ships and then continued strafing everybody. And he went through some of this fire, to get to an ammunition storage place to get weapons and things to distribute because they didn't know whether they were going to have people invading on land or not, and they probably had to fire at the plane. So he got a medal for bravery for that. And today he is probably about 90 years old.
Who is it?
Ed Hubbard. I'm in contact with his wife, and they live in Parkton, Maryland, and here he is today in very, very good health.
You remember your baptism?
Yes, I do. I was baptized at this same watering hole, Brewster's. I was about 12. That time I might have been 14. It was 1942. And Cass Dickerson Wilson stood with me.
Ah,
And
Cass.
Cassie and Uncle Tom took us out, one by one out into the water and baptized us. And everybody stood on the shore and sang hymns. I remember that very well.
Do you remember feeling, as a young girl, did you take kindly to church?
I took very well to church. Of course, I remember my very first memory is of being in the nursery class, and I think my mother taught it. And they had a sandbox. They had a little table similar to what Evelyn made out front for the flowers. And they had sand in it. And of course, in the sand they had how the camels went across the desert and all about Bethlehem and everything. That made a big impression on me. I remember. I always thought that was so wonderful, that little sandbox.
Your best childhood friend, who was it?
I had a number.
Before high school.
Well, most of the kids that lived in the row, let's say Jean Cole was one, and she grew up and married my cousin Junie Hubbard, and Audrey and Ronnie. Of course, they were cousins, but they lived. And then a guy named Russell Riggs, and he was killed on Okinawa when he joined the Marines in the Korean War. And Buddy Widows, and he's a second or third cousin. He didn't live in the row, but he would come up and play with us. But all those kids in the row we played with, a bunch of them.
What do you remember about summer nights or summer days growing up in Elk Mills, Maryland? You're 13, you're 14, you're 15. What do you remember? Anything stand
One
out?
of the things that maybe going up into 12, we would play outside at night. We'd play lay-low sheepy, hide and seek, and there was Dad's cousin lived on the end, Al Lawrence and his wife, and they had no children. And they were, Bea was great. She would come out and play with the kids, you know, so we'd play Lay Low Sheepy.
Lay Low Sheepy.
And this was where you divide into two groups. One group goes and hides, and it's night, it's dark, so there's lots of places where you won't be seen. And Bea, who was our leader of the team that had to go find these people, and our job was to go find them. And the one person from the hidden group came, and they had to point their fingers, and one finger had to be pointed toward where they were hiding. The other wasn't, of course, and you'd choose, and you could ask, are we getting warm? Are we getting warm? And that sort of thing, until we found the group, and then it was their turn.
Can you remember the first time you kissed a boy?
Yes.
Oh yeah,
It was, we used to have these parties where they'd play birthday parties. They'd spin a bottle, and if it pointed to you, then they'd have a postmaster and the postman. Then you'd go in, you have to give a kiss.
wow.
And different ones took turns being postman. That was sometimes good and sometimes bad.
Well, give me a name here. Who was the postmaster that you kissed?
Oh, well, they're, you know.
First time.
I don't even I don't remember which one it was. Some Bobby Brown or somebody. I don't know. But
Wow.
I wasn't too keen on it, really. They were kind of inexperienced. We were all kind of inexperienced puppies.
Talk about your parents. Let's start with your mother. How would you describe your relationship with her? Her name was Bertha Carr. Bertha Viola Walker Carr. How would you describe briefly your relationship with her, honestly?
I had a good relationship with my mother. Sometimes I got irritated because she wouldn't always listen to me. She would, if I wanted to put a point across, it seemed like she never got the point I was trying to get across, because she had her preset idea of what she believed. So if I'm trying to change her opinion, it was difficult to do. But I felt like my mother and my father were fair with me. They kept me on a tight rein, but they also gave me enough freedom that I didn't feel like I was on a tight rein. I mean, they were pretty vigilant about where I went and who I saw and so forth, especially when I got in teens. But never made me feel like I couldn't do things or go places. Because I went skating and did all kinds of things that I liked. So
Could you talk to her about boys and about
well,
problems?
she talked about boys all the time and how you're supposed to behave and not behave, and made it very clear how you had to conduct yourself, with boys. She was always being very verbal person. You knew what she was thinking, and she made it very clear what she expected of you. And you felt like you didn't really want to disappoint her. I didn't want to disappoint my parents in my behavior. And of course she talked about how important it was to have a good reputation in the village, because everybody talks, everybody sees what you do. So this was impressed on me, you must conduct yourself in a proper way. But I think it works. It works. In other words, she was establishing values for me, getting me to understand that I must have certain values in my life. And of course that was backed up at the church too by what we learned there.
And then how would you contrast your relationship with your mother with what you had with your father?
My dad, when I was growing up, my dad was not very talkative, but when he did say anything, you knew he meant it. And I thought of him as a hard-working man, going out in the morning and coming back for dinner, and then sometimes during the war going back to work. He worked long hours, 16 hours a day maybe. But I had respect for him. And he taught the adult Sunday school class, did a good job. So I had a good opinion of my...
Did your parents get along? Or were there a lot of volatility?
No, Daddy was quiet, so he didn't fight, but my mom would, what I call nag. I felt like she nagged him too much. Mm-hmm. If she wanted something done, she just kept at it and at it. Roy, I need a new cabinet in the kitchen. Roy, I need a new cabinet. So one day she said, I'm not going to wait for Roy. We're going to get up there and take that cabinet down. So we climbed up and started tearing this built-in cabinet, in the kitchen. So Daddy comes in, he walks in, just kind of smiles, and he said, now see, this is where the communication showed no communication. He said, well, I've already ordered the supplies for it. You just didn't have to be in such a hurry. He'd already ordered everything to take care of it. And here we're ripping it out, see. But he didn't tell my mother that.
So she didn't have a clue
So
that
she
there was
thought
something
he was
in the works.
ignoring her. Of course, maybe he was just a little bit resentful that she kept nagging at him. But she would nag, and he did most everything she finally, kept at, like taking the wall out near the stairway so that it wasn't an entranceway. It made the living room bigger and all that. She made good improvements.
Did you eventually put that back? Is that what happened?
No, there was a wall there. I recall when I was little, and they took that wall out. It was just a little wall. Mm-hmm. But one thing she never got him to do was, he enclosed the kitchen, the back porch, and made it into that little laundry room.
Did that used to be part of the kitchen?
No, that was
that was an out porch.
That was a porch. And she wanted a bathroom right in back of that. But she never got that. That was too much.
Mode of transportation. How did your family get around? We should also mention that you have a brother, Jerry, who's a couple of years older than you. I don't want to spend really much time on him, but I do want to ask you about mode of transportation. How did you all get around? And did you go anywhere?
We didn't go places too often. My dad had his Oldsmobile, his Packard, different brands, and every 2 weeks we went to Wilmington, Delaware. Maybe one Saturday we'd go to Elkton to get things we needed. He had to do his banking, and we would go to the little news store and buy comics. That was our big outing. Jerry and I would buy comic books with our weekly allowance, which was $1. And
$1 a week.
$1. And
That was a lot back then.
that was a lot because we could get comic books for 10 cents. We couldn't spend all of it for comic books because we saved some for church and we saved some, 10 or whatever, and then we could go buy our comic books.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that was the way we traveled. And then the big trip to Wilmington, that was to buy clothes and boots. And one time we went to Camden, New Jersey and bought a bunch of stuff. And they bought me a pair of little white boots. We had it in the car and we came back to the car and somebody had stolen it. They'd stolen all of our purchases. We were really, that was upsetting.
Wow.
And Jerry Walker was upset about that because here we're visiting them and our car gets robbed.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I don't remember whether they replaced my boots. I don't know.
So then how would you describe your high school years?
It was a big jump from the 2-room school to getting on the bus and going to the high school. And I remember being real scared the first day because we were in this big auditorium. We didn't have an auditorium back in Elk Mills. And this one girl, Joanne Bollinger, sat next to me. And she was real friendly, and she was from Elkton. She kind of made me feel better, you know. It turned out she was in my class when they divided up, and I was in
Where did you go to high school?
Elkton High School.
Where it is
Elkton
now?
there. I don't know where the high school is. The high school that I went to, I think, is a middle school now. I'm not sure.
So
Did
back
you go on the
then,
bus then?
We went on the bus. We went to the post office by the railroad, caught the bus.
this is 1949?
No.
40,
No, that she would have been 20
No, I
then.
went in high school about I graduated in 46, so it had to be 42, 1942.
1942
War
years
just started.
And boy, it was a public high school. A little bit of a distance from Elk Mills, so
5 miles.
you were getting out in a way.
Yeah. And there were about 500 students. It wasn't a huge school.
Now, did you start to date young boys when you were junior
Not
and
the
senior?
first and second year. We had crushes on different ones, and we'd have a prom, but the girls would all dress up and go. Not all of them had dates, and then the boys sat along the wall weren't that quick to get up and ask people to dance. But
Well, can you remember your first romance as a high school person?
yes, there was one guy liked me named Joe Weldon. He acted like comic, you know, and he did make a date for me for a prom, and I had and the sad thing is this one guy that had grown up. He'd been in the row across from where I lived when I was little. We both chopped down my dad's cherry tree and got in trouble for that.
No.
And we lied about it, and there lays the tree.
I've heard this before.
He was playing with me. We weren't very big, but we must have this little saw. So Dad had a little sapling there. It was going to be a cherry tree, and we sawed it down. Well, I got a whipping for that, and he went home and he got a whipping. So that's what I remember of him. Well, then he was in Northeast High School, and his cousin Emily Allen, who was in my class in school, she grew up there, and she had my same birthday. He would go up. He was up there pacing, says, "I want to ask Joyce to go to the prom," and he kept putting it off and putting it off. In the meantime, Joe Weldon asks me. I had no real interest in Joe, but it was a date, right? And then Dick comes and asks me, and I was so disappointed. I had to tell him no, that I had a date. After he had paced and paced about scared to be rejected, he comes and asks me, and I have to turn him down. And of course the cousins are telling me about all this. So. I did later, several years later I dated him. And that was, we had been, a bunch of the girls in Newark, we'd been up to the Poconos for a week, and we came back, and I was at my friend's house in Newark, and the phone rang, and it was my brother, and said, "Hey, Dickie Jackson called. He wants to know if you can go to this dance in Northeast." And I said, "Well, yes, I could." I didn't, here I thought, oh golly, I need a shampoo. After a vacation, you feel kind of yucky. But I thought, well, I'm not going to pass a date with him. So he met me on.
So you couldn't take a shower?
Well, we had to, it was kind of, we had to get going.
The timing was.
Yeah. And so he agreed to meet me on a little hotel, the front porch of a hotel called the Deer Park Hotel in Newark. And so they took me over there. And I went to Northeast. Well, it turns out he'd had a fight with his girlfriend.
He was trying to make her jealous?
I think he was trying to make her jealous.
Oh.
He later married her, so that was a serious. Because I hadn't seen him for years,
Uh-huh.
But I went with him. He had a wonderful voice. He starts singing and had a great voice. But he was stubborn. I wanted him to dance and he wouldn't budge. And I thought, he's got a real stubborn streak. I don't think I'd want to deal with that one.
So now you're a senior in high school. Doesn't sound like you were going steady with anyone.
No, I had several dates. One guy I had a terrific crush on. His name was Dick Carrico. And he was a couple grades. He had graduated. And he came and asked me for a date. And a double date, because another couple from the high school went. And I thought he was pretty special. We dated a few times. Then he went in the Army and was in New Jersey and wrote me letters. I had a crush on him for a while.
So now, as a high school senior back then, were you automatically thinking college, university?
No, I was steered by my parents and different ones to go into commercial to become a secretary, though they really didn't give me too many options. I didn't want to be a nurse. I didn't want to be a teacher, really, because I don't think I had the
Patience.
right personality for a teacher. I didn't feel like I had the right motivation for that. And I would have liked to have been a journalist, but no, I didn't go to college. Now, they did try to send me to Graceland. My parents didn't, but Uncle Tom did. He wrote to Graceland and said I had good grades, so he wanted to get me admitted. But it was kind of late when he did that. He had to talk to my parents and get them to agree. And they wrote back and said with all the G.I. Joes coming home from the service, they had filled up. There was no room at that point.
Wow.
So then I went to business school in Wilmington, Delaware. But it didn't, I had a plan. So it's not something I was...
And business school's what, 2 years?
1 year. It was only 1 year business school. We took accounting and business law and different things, and spelling.
And then once you graduated with a little bit of a degree there, where'd you go then?
I went to a law firm, B.N. Brown Law Firm in Wilmington, Delaware. But it was boring. He was, because he was a real estate lawyer. And they had two or three girls in that office. Now, one girl was real sweet. She was a receptionist. The other two, one was an older lady, and the other one had been there and she had been there a long time. And then the other girl had been several years. She was so catty. She was jealous of the other lady. It's like I had never run into that bickering type thing, that thing where everybody's looking at you, And I wasn't too happy there. I took dictation from him and all that, but then one time, one time, he was getting ready to get a phone call from a golfing buddy, the lawyer. And he said, comes in, he says to me, I expect this guy to call me. And I don't want to go golfing, but I don't want him to know that I'm here, that I'm out somewhere. And he started telling me this exaggerated, long story about, and I was getting totally confused about it wasn't in my, I wasn't.
It wasn't in your DNA to
I
fib.
didn't like to lie. I know you have to do some things like this, like just, he's not in or something like that. So just when he's still telling me what he wants me to say and all, the phone rings. And it's this guy, and I got all tangled up on, I didn't make it clear the guy wasn't there. And he's dying. For some reason he didn't want to play golf with this guy. Anyway, I felt like I really messed it up, But later on he let me go because he said, doesn't seem like it's working out. And I was like, yeah, I guess it's not. So he gave me a bonus check at Christmas. But it turned out to be the best thing in the world because then I went and got a job at the University of Delaware and I loved it there. I mean, that was great. So.
And what did you do there?
There I was a secretary for the Department of Economics and Business Administration part of the day, and for the Department of Modern Languages the rest of the day. But I stayed in one office and everybody brought their work to me.
Why did you like it so much?
I had my own office. I wasn't bugged, by catty people, which I found I didn't like. And there was a girl across the courtyard. She worked for the English department, and we got acquainted because we could see each other, and we started taking art classes. We took an art class, she and her sister and I. And her sister's the one that she introduced Bill and I to, and
What was her name?
she worked in the chemistry department as secretary, and her husband was a graduate student, Betty and Bob Kennard. They were married. And she said Bill would go in there having trouble with calculus. Her husband was the calculus teacher. And she'd say, Bill, what you need is a girlfriend. So she introduced us.
Well, that's a perfect segue. Tell us about that. Tell us about how you came to meet your lifetime mate. Bill Conrad.
Yeah. They told me he would be coming over. It seems like they sent him over to the office to meet me. My boss was away. And so he came over and introduced himself and made a date for that weekend. It was the 4th of July weekend coming up. And then we were to go double date with Betty and Bob, and that's what we did. We went to White.
Well, what did you think of him when he first walked in that door?
I thought he was kind of cute. Yeah, he was
Wasn't he
nice.
nervous?
Huh?
Was he nervous?
No, he came in.
Were you nervous?
Said who he was. Yeah, a little bit. And then he asked me for it. Of course, I knew who he was, so I can't remember whether they had a formal introduction. Seems like they sent him over there. They told me. And then we went out for the weekend. We went to White Crystal Beach, and they weren't quite pleased with being there, so we decided to go to Atlantic City. So we did that, and that was fun. Bill said he liked it because I held his hand when he was walking down the boardwalk.
But you had only known him a couple of days.
Yeah. Well, that was the first day. Well, yeah, I met him. But that was the first time I'd really been out on a date with him.
Well, was there any inclination that weekend, that Atlantic City trek with this other couple? They were the chaperones in a way.
Yeah.
Was there any inclination that there was chemistry there, that there was something going on maybe?
I just attracted to him, and he seemed attracted, so I thought, well, we'll see where it goes.
Well, let's back up.
Yeah.
Prior to Bill Conrad, Did you ever get close to marrying any other man?
Yes. Not really. Well, I don't know how to say that because I dated. Here's the way I did. I dated, but I never really said I'm going steady with anybody. I said, I'll date you, but I'll also be dating other people. And so I did that. Maybe I'd be dating 2 or 3 guys at a time, but it might stretch out to a year with one. Maybe some of the others were just casual dates or once in a while, you know. So, but I did. Pete offered, wanted to marry me, but I couldn't. I felt like I was too young. He lived in Texas here.
Pete who?
Offered.
Pete Alford, Alford. In fact, when he did get married, he lived over near Hobby Airport. And Bill and I came through we were in California, coming this way. He said, we're going to be going through Texas, let's look up your old boyfriend. And so we called Pete up, and by this time he had 2 or 3 kids. And when we called, a couple of them were screaming. They were trying to get him to bed. And so he told them we'd be coming through. And I had Evelyn and Glenn. And when Glenn got there, he was screaming. I thought he was going to wake theirs up. So we stopped by their house and visited for a couple hours and then went on. Pete came in, sat down, asked me about my family and all, because he had spent a lot of time at my parents' house.
Well, did you ever have your heart broken prior to knowing Bill? Do you look back and remember one person that broke your heart?
Well, I don't think he did it on purpose, but I really had a crush on that Carrico guy. Dick Carrico. But that was kind of a school crush, schoolgirl.
And there was never a long-term dating
there was
relationship?
nothing there where, no, not really.
And so then now give us...
Somehow or other, there was chemistry there. I really, really liked him, you know.
But did you ever let him know?
Well, a few years later, I'd been talking to Bobby about it. Bobby Widows, and Bobby was a friend of his. He knew him quite well. And I just mentioned, boy, I really had a crush on him. So he called me up and made a date. This is years later. I've been working at the university for several years, so we went out to a movie or something. And we talked, but you know.
It wasn't there.
It wasn't the same then.
So give us the timetable now on the courtship of Bill Conrad and you.
Well, that was pretty rapid because we met and
You were how old?
23 or 24. I must have been 23, I guess, when we met. 24 when we got married, because we got married in April and I'd had my birthday. But, see, we were engaged. We went together all summer, got engaged Labor Day weekend in Philadelphia, and then got married in April. For about 9 months altogether. And he decided he just wanted to. We were going to get married later, but he wanted to move it back up to April. He was going to get married in June or something like that. He said, let's get married sooner. So we did.
And what do you...
Conrad didn't like him much, did he?
Yeah, your parents, what'd they think of him?
Mom had a little trouble getting, well, I don't know, Daddy was so shocked. He was kind of shocked, because he'd been through me going with dating boys for a long period of time, not really, nothing coming up, because I really didn't want to settle down. And
Why not?
I was perfectly happy at home, perfectly happy with my job, and going out was fun. We just went out and had fun, you know, went skating, did different things, and I was content, but I really didn't feel like I wanted to settle down and get married. I felt like I was too young to get married, really did.
Well, you were.
I wasn't ready to get married. And Pete Alford said, the problem with Joyce is she's got too nice a home and she doesn't want to leave it because she's too comfortable here. That was probably right.
But something about Bill Conrad changed that.
Yeah, then we got serious. And that shocked Dad. Of course, Bill had to go ask for my dad for my hand in marriage. He was very old-fashioned. And Dad said, well, what does Joyce want? He never really said yes. He just said, what does Joyce want? I don't think he was too happy. And Mom and Bill's personalities kind of, you can imagine they're a little, took them a long time to get along just right.
And then motherhood. Of course, your husband is trying to build a career. You're no longer working, I don't think.
Well, I worked for up until a month before Evan was born at the university.
And what was that experience like for you, having a child?
Wonderful. That's the most wonderful. Of course, it took 18 or 20 hours for you to get
I
here.
thought it was 36.
36. I was there a couple of days. And Mom said, don't you think that doctor's too young? She didn't think he's very experienced.
But you went from being a young person who had a good, comfortable home life, a solid job, circle of friends, thinking you're too young to settle and get married, and the next thing you know, you're having a baby.
Yeah.
And did that ever strike you? Did that ever grind at you? Did you ever say, oh my gosh? Or are you going to tell me that the majesty, the magic of having a child completely took over who you were?
Well, once you have a child, and you know this yourself, that you're focused on that child. You're focused on motherhood, fatherhood, whatever.
But you were married a couple years before I was born, right?
Well, we got married in April 53, and you were born December, so it's about, what, an hour?
December 54.
A year and a half or something like that. Bill said, I think it's time we had a child. So take my temperature every day. He's very technical about it. I said, yes. Okay.
Hey, did you have a nice honeymoon?
Yes, we went we stopped in Bel Air at a motel after the wedding and everything. Next day we drove up the Skyline Drive and got a cabin. A cute little cabin in the mountains. And this old mountaineer comes by and says, is this your old lady? To Bill. And he started calling me the old lady. I said, Bill, I don't really like that. I don't like you saying that. And so we stayed there a couple days, and then we went on to Pennsylvania to Valley Forge. We went to where the battles were and did all that. Then we went to Washington, D.C. to a fancy hotel and spent the night. And he woke up and said, you know, you can order breakfast here. So we called in and they said, we're not serving breakfast anymore, it's lunchtime. I said, Bill, you have to get up earlier. Then we went out, then we went to out in Maryland.
Did you go to the Poconos?
Not during that trip. We did later. That was a vacation. But then we went to the grocery store and bought, see, we had our house. We'd had it built before in Newark. And so then we went grocery shopping to get things, and that was a shock, you know, because you realize all these things you needed that had always been provided at home. Now we have to have soap and all this stuff. We had a big order.
And then the children kept coming, didn't they?
They did. When Glenn came, he was such a quiet, big, sleeping baby, and here's little Evelyn just, oh, she wanted to be busy every minute, and she had to have a friend. Little Anna Lee was 4, I think, and you were almost 2, and you'd get up in the morning and say, I want to see Anna Lee. And you'd go back of our house, and they were up on a hill facing the road like, and had big steps to the back, and so you didn't want to climb up the steps, so you'd go down, stand at the foot of those steps and yell, Anna Lee, Anna Lee. Finally the mother would come to the door and say, oh, Evelyn, okay, she'll be out in a little bit. And Anna Lee would come out, and they'd come to my house, and sometimes you'd play at her house. Do you remember her?
I remember you telling me about her.
You both had nurses' kits. Each got a nurse's
I
kit.
remember seeing a picture of that. I think.
Yeah.
Did you and Bill ever have a conversation about how many children you'd have?
I told him I wanted 9, and he said, "You really want 9?" But by the time we got to 4, he was saying no more. Then Carl came along. He didn't want to have the 5th one. Too late. It wasn't because he didn't like the children, it was because he felt the burden of providing for them.
Let's talk about the role of a mother. And as you look back now, you're 80 years old. You've had 5 grow up. When you look back, and if you had to speak to a group of people and talk about the way you were, how do you think you did? Were you a good mom, a compassionate mom? Were you too strict? Do you think you got involved with them enough?
Well, I think I wasn't consistent enough with discipline. I mean, they could twist my arm. Bill would go to work and he'd leave an order. Don't let this one do this or that because they didn't behave right. And he might say, let them stay. It was too harsh a punishment, I thought, whatever it would be. So I really wouldn't do that. I don't like that one. I'm here, I'm the one who has to put up with it. I'll discipline, but not as harshly as he wants to discipline. I think I kept involved with him as much as possible. Except for my housework, probably kept me busy sometimes. Could have done, but they were all free to bring in their friends. There were sometimes Evelyn would have a friend in her room, Brian had one in his. Glenn would be with one of his, and they felt free to bring their friends in. So they seemed pretty happy. The boys would fight, and that would get on my nerves.
You seem to have a pretty solid relationship with Christ. Did that ever ebb and flow in your life, or has that been a consistency for you?
I would say it's been very consistent. I feel like my faith in God has helped me through a lot of tough times, especially when Dan was going through all of his trials. And I did get good support from the people at church too. I go to prayer meeting, and most people won't talk about those kind of problems at that time, but I did, because I thought, shucks, I need support. So I would tell them, I'm having problems, and I appreciate the support I get. And they were good. Because I was fishing around looking for the right help, that I could get. So I got it.
You lost your husband 12 years ago now, I think. Huh?
13.
13. What was that like?
I remember that was like I felt like a zombie through a lot of that. When he was so sick, because he wanted me there. I'd get in bed and he would call Joyce, and so he'd want me to come in there with him, because the hospital bed was in the other room. But fortunately, he didn't seem to be. They kept him on a lot of pain medicine, so he didn't seem to be suffering. But his systems had broken down. He wasn't taking any food. Once in a while I'd ask for a glass of milk, but his body wasn't really processing anything. So that was kind of hard. One time he looked up at the ceiling and he said to me, "I see people up there." And I said, "Bill, it's your medicine." That's what, and it wasn't like Nana. You could said to her, "There's no people there," and she wouldn't have believed it. But he just, "Oh, it's the medicine." That's all he said. So,
When you look back on your marriage with Bill, and he became a little bit more complicated as the years went by, I think I can say that. He went from being the happy-go-lucky is, but loves them and romantic type early on to a little more serious as life went on. And then
Is that accurate?
you feuded over how to raise the kids and what
Yeah,
the
we
right
did.
philosophies were.
that was not so good.
But by and large, when you look back at that relationship, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think Bill was a good father. He tried to be involved. Sometimes he was too harsh, and I don't know whether the kids will verify that, but he really and truly loved his children. But what he wanted them to be pretty perfect, and that's always hard when you're demanding your kids to be perfect. But the thing I did not like was as he got older, he got less involved with family. He distanced himself. He distanced himself from his grandchildren, and I don't think it's because he couldn't love them, because he said one time Evelyn was sitting beside his desk and had in here, and Damien was there, and they were talking, and he said Damien was so cute. He said it was such a cute little baby, but I didn't say anything. It was like deliberately withholding. And to me that's sad, because I think he missed out a lot by doing that. And he didn't want me, actually he did not want me to get too involved with the grandchildren, because he wanted me to himself, which was, maybe he felt like, well, it's time now I get some attention. But at the same time, he's out running all the time, and wasn't much attention I could give him. I really didn't want to do those things. I supported him, made albums, I walked sometimes, but to me he was obsessed with running more than he should have been, more than was good for him. But I would have liked him to have been a more loving type granddaddy.
Do you think it was because of all that trauma that he went through with Daniel that he was just afraid to be hurt?
I think so. He couldn't cope with it. He really couldn't. And he didn't want to believe for a long time. He wanted to believe he could snap out of it, and yet intellectually he probably knew he couldn't the same way he wanted him to. But he would let me do everything and support me financially, but he kept himself at arm's length. In the beginning, he would visit and go.
I wanted to ask you, what would you say you miss the most about Bill? I mean, we know it got tough to be extremely happy with him in those last couple of years. In the background, you hear grandchildren cheering at a football game. But still, though, would you ever wake up and realize that, like it's all over again, that he's gone?
Oh yes, many times. I stop and think so many years have passed without him. I think one of the sad things to me is that there's 13 years of life he didn't get to live. And
Right.
I wish he could have. Because I think 68's kind of young to die.
Well, what do you miss about him?
I guess I miss his humor. He had a good sense of humor, and lots of times he could make me laugh with that little silly comments he'd make. And I miss his handiness because he could fix anything, and he would do. He was willing to tackle anything, even maybe the week first of the 3 weeks before he died. I was trying to give him something to do because he was here at house and not working any longer, and I had a radio of Dan's that needed to be fixed. It wasn't working right, so I said, Bill, maybe you could look at this radio for Dan. And he sat at the table and he took it apart and he was trying to fix it. And he said, you know, I'd love to fix it, but I can't do it now. He couldn't. It was too much for him. But I know that if he had been well, he would have fixed that radio. He wanted to do it real bad. And I said, well, it's not really that important to worry about it, so let's put it up. And so I loved his intelligence and the way he could do things. Mm-hmm. And he would give me nice compliments lots of times. Whenever he did, I felt really great. He would say good things to me. And even just before he died, I was walking through the room and he said, Joyce, I love you. And I stopped and went back and told him I loved him. But he was very sentimental in many ways. He always remembered the special occasions. It's amazing he would be thoughtful about things. But he seemed to be sentimental that way with his cards and things. He missed that kind of thing.
And now, you've lived almost 13 years. And your years, and we talked about this last week when we arrived, hasn't been a normal 13 years, and heck, you could add 10 more and you look at the caretaking of Daniel, mentally ill. Your parents didn't die, they lasted a long time. And for many, many years, you woke up in the morning thinking, I have to do this for this person, or I have to do this for that person. How much of a burden has it been? Or would you look at it that way?
I didn't look at it as a burden. Sometimes I got tired. It was hard having to run over to Dad's apartment, especially when they moved it further away 2 or 3 times. And toward the end, I'd go over 2 and 3 times a day to make sure he got fed, had his medicine, to make sure he was okay. And it was sad seeing him decline. But I respected and loved him so much that it was a pleasure to do it for him. I mean, he was a good parent, so I said I'm going to do what I can for Dad. Mm-hmm. But running to the doctors, and sometimes it was a chore. That was a chore sometimes.
Well, but it's been awful painful having a son that hasn't been able to go and live a normal life.
Danny has, he's been a blessing to me. At the same time, at times it's been difficult. I worry about him, about what will happen to him. I'm sorry he's not more self-sustaining because he needs so much encouragement and he has so little self-confidence that I'd love to see him be able to stay right here. And I worry that he'd have to have supervision, a good bit of supervision to maintain it, and by phone or whatever, somebody checking. But if he could get acclimated to it, it would be better than being in some group home, I think. Mm-hmm. And maybe not, maybe I don't know.
You've stayed busy with other projects. For instance, church historian. What's that been like for you?
Well, that's become something I just do because I've been doing that since 1980. And I've kept a record of every year, and photographic and so forth, and it's been fun, but also like, it's so much easier with the computer. The computer's made it wonderful because I can just write it up. I'll come from church, write down what I want to, and now I've got it all caught up for this year. Just write down a couple Sundays and I've got it caught up.
When you've enjoyed your church family in general, Pasadena branch here in Houston, Texas, you've been a member now 40 plus years.
Since 1964, however long that is, and they've been good. I'm a little sad to see how the numbers have declined. I think that's kind of happening in a lot of the branches in Texas, but the ones that are there are very steadfast, and I'd like to see it get more young people. But we have a good time, we get along well, and go out to eat after church and have social functions. It's a little more difficult with Jonathan living so far away. He lives in the Woodlands, that's an hour away. He's a pastor, so you think of it, on Sunday he's got a 2-hour drive to and from. So we don't really do midweek things, except I go to the Bay Area. That's good.
And you still bowl.
I enjoy bowling. That's a lot of fun. Nice teammates. They're all good, friendly, pleasant people, so that works out. And I had a great time bowling with you and the grandkids. That was nice.
And you're able to take a cruise. It seems like you enjoy the cruise world.
I enjoyed that, yes. I enjoyed it better when the whole family went, when the big part of the family went. That was fun. But it was nice to go. We had fun. I do the trips because when there is a trip, because it gets me out seeing things away from here, and I feel like it's something I should do.
Well, you're 80. How old do you want to live to? How old do you want to be?
I want to live as long as I'm healthy. If I can be healthy, I'll live to 100 if I can. If I can't, I want to go fast otherwise. I don't want to go any nursing home. I can't stand nursing homes. They frighten me. And that happens to so many people. Such a terrible place. I know some of them have to be there.
She wants to talk about motherhood.
Well, let's go back. Boy, you've been a mother since way back, and you'll always be a mother.
Yeah.
Seems like it suits you well. Evelyn never seems to have a crossword. I'm always trying to get her to conjure up. Of course, there was a little bit of a time period when she was acting up a little bit, and you two got sideways, but it seems to me like you've always had a pretty solid relationship with your kids. Would you say that?
I think so. I hope I do. I love them unconditionally. So, I'm not looking for flaws in my children. I see some. I see where I guess what I want to say, I see where I'd like to have seen their lives better. Speaking of Glenn in that respect, but I know that they have to live their lives their way and do the best they can. I'm just rooting for them all the way. I want them to have a good life.
And what advice would you give to grandchildren? Maybe grandchildren that you'll never meet, great-grandchildren that you'll never meet, and they're trying to get an idea of the woman that you are. But first off, what advice would you give to young people growing up in this world?
Well, I think the standard is to have pride in yourself, confidence. Don't let other people influence you in bad ways, not in ways where you'll damage yourself, either with using substances or drugs, smoking, even being with people who are foul-mouthed or foul-minded. If you can keep people, associates who are good people. And it's really hard in this world for kids to be out there and have all these terrible things tempting them, or even being foisted on them when they don't want it. And they have to have build within themselves strong standards. You have to make up your mind when you're young. I made up my mind when I was in my teens of what I was going to do and not do regarding those kind of things. And nothing could change it, because I went to a party at the beach one time with my friends from Newark, Delaware. And they were good kids, but they said, we're going to the beach and it's all girls, so we're going to all get drunk. I said, well, maybe you are, but I'm not. I said, I won't stop you from what you're doing because you've made up your minds, but I said, just don't expect me to, because I made a promise to my parents that I would not, and I'm not. So they accepted that. And I said, I'll take notes. Said, oh, she's going to take notes. So, but I didn't like it because one of them had a 15-year-old sister, and they were letting her drink, you know. Now, I didn't go for that. But they didn't kick me out, so I stayed. And the next, they didn't really do anything bad, you know, except they were trying it out. But I said, I'm really not going to. And I had made up my mind about that at that early age, and it doesn't matter what anybody says, they're not going to get me to do any of those things that I don't want to do. And I think young people have to say to themselves, I may go out with my friends, and my friends might want to try this or that, but if I don't want to, I should not do it. But I don't know whether they do that. You know, I don't know. I don't know whether they have that strength of character developed. And I'd like to see the grandchildren develop that.
When you look back on your life, are there any major disappointments? Things you regret doing?
I always wanted to ski, and I never got to ski. Every time it was where I could ski, Bill would be skiing, but I couldn't because I was expecting a baby, so that was just something I had to do without. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there are a lot of things I would have done.
Well, what are you most proud of?
I'm proud of my family. I'm proud of how they are. I think my children are good children, all of them. And I think they want to live good lives, and I think they want their children to be good, and trying to do a good job with them. And we know they have free agency, and they may not do exactly what they want them to, but I'm proud of my kids. I'm proud of Dan, because he's withstood a serious illness, and it hasn't been easy. It's not an easy life. He's a sick person most of the time, but he's struggling against that. So you have to be proud of your kids when I'm proud of Evelyn, I'm proud of Paul, I'm proud of Brian and Naomi, and Glenn, and Mariah. I'm sorry that her life is the way it is. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Carl's right in there.
And Carl and his family, of course, I'm very proud of their little boy. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy that Carl has a wife who supports him and in what he does. Mm-hmm. She's been good.
Well, what should your tombstone say? What would it be accurate to say? Mm-hmm.
That I don't know.
I keep thinking about that 21-year-old working woman who was perfectly content going back to home to sleep in that bedroom up in Elk Mills. And people would say, Joyce has got it so good she doesn't want to leave. In your own mind, you said you weren't ready to settle down. And yet, just like that, it all changed.
Yeah. It was time to make a change.
You maintain relationships a long time. You don't give up on people, do you?
No, I don't. Well, I guess that's true. When I have a friend, I count him as a friend. And that's what I can't understand about some people. Like Gladys was my friend for years, and she was friends of other people. All of a sudden, she just stopped seeing everybody. Doesn't call, doesn't, nobody. The garden club, what happened to her? She just, and that was a deliberate choice of hers. So that it was hard for me to understand how you can know someone that long and be that close, and then just, that's it.
And
When you
how
haven't done
unfortunate,
anything.
because she's the one who lives closest to you, that you could
yeah.
be most easily be around.
And she was the one that pushed for the friendship. She was the one that every day she would, not every day, but almost every day, she would come down here and visit, come in and have tea with me. And so I wonder what's happened in her life to make her want to cut her friends off. So I would never do that with my friends.
Where do you see yourself going from here? Plans, trips. Obviously maintaining this home so Daniel has a place. Supporting your kids long distance emotionally. An occasional airplane trip. Are you looking forward to the next 10 years?
I'm hoping that they will be healthy ones. I'm trying to maintain my health and stay busy in the world. I want to go out and do things. I love to do things. I love to read. I love to go out and bowl. I love to go on a trip now and then. And then I enjoy my home. And of course I love seeing my family whenever I see them. And it's good. I like the fact that Carl goes to church where I do, because that's good. I get to see them. That's nice, and be involved a little bit. Because I don't walk in on my family. You know, I don't go over there unless I'm invited, because I want them to have their privacy. It's not fair. You know, it wouldn't be right. Carl has said, you can just come on over and drop in. But I wouldn't do that, because they have to have their privacy, their life, and I go when I'm invited and see them at church, and that's good. I'm glad I see them at church, because that way I get to see them more and get to enjoy. And then they bring Eric, and I get to keep him once in a while, and Danny loves that too. So.
Well, Joyce, thank you very much for opening up.
Quite welcome.
Sounds like it's been a wonderful life.
It's been a good life. I have no complaints. You know, you can complain and say, well, shucks, I had a child who suffered this way with a mental illness. Maybe other things that you can complain about, but when you look around and see how lucky you really are, you know, you take what you get and you do the best you can with it, and just be thankful to God for all that you have.